My husband looked me dead in the eyes and said, "I want the house, the cars, the business, everything." He wasn't crying. He wasn't apologizing. He was demanding, like he was reading from some script his lawyer had prepared. Like 14 years of marriage, 2 children, and everything we'd built together meant nothing more than items on an inventory list. My lawyer, Patricia Morrison, reached across the conference table and squeezed my hand. She'd been practicing family law in Atlanta for 25 years, had seen women destroyed in divorce court. She'd watched husbands hide assets and manipulate the system. But when I leaned over and whispered what I was about to do, her eyes went wide with concern. "Before we dive in, I want to ask you something. Where in the world are you listening from?" Drop your city or country in the comments. I love seeing how far our community reaches. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time. Your support truly helps this community grow. Thank you for being here. Brielle, we can fight this. We should fight this. He's not entitled to half of what he's demanding. Georgia is an equitable distribution state. We have options. I looked at her, then shifted my gaze to Khalil, sitting across from me with his attorney. That smug expression playing at the corners of his mouth. The same face I used to trace with my fingertips on Sunday mornings. The same man I held when his father passed. The same person who stood before our families at Ebenezer Baptist and promised to cherish me through everything. "Give it to him," I said quietly. Patricia's pen froze mid-signature. "What did you say?" "You heard me. The house, the cars, the business. Give him everything he's asking for." Khalil's expression flickered for a second. He wasn't expecting surrender. His lawyer, some slick-talking brother named Jerome with 2 white veneers and a Rolex that screamed compensation, leaned over and whispered something. Khalil nodded slowly, like a man who'd won the lottery. He thought I'd broken. He thought I was waving a white flag. Everyone in that room thought the same thing. My grandmother called me that night, her voice thick with worry and something close to anger. Grandma Portia didn't raise her voice often, but when she did, you listened. She'd raised 4 children after my grandfather died, worked as a school cafeteria manager for 30 years, and never asked for anything from anyone. She was the backbone of our family, and hearing the disappointment in her voice cut deeper than any of Khalil's betrayals. "Brielle Noel Carter, what in God's name are you doing? Your grandfather built that business from nothing. Started with 1 food truck outside Georgia Tech, worked himself half to death so your mama and her brothers could have something real, and now you're just handing it over to a man who doesn't deserve a single second of your loyalty? Grandma, I need you to trust me." "Trust you?" "Baby, you're not thinking straight. That man has broken your heart, and a broken heart makes poor decisions. Let me call your Uncle Frederick. Let me get the family together. I'm not broken, Grandma. Not anymore. And I promise you, I know exactly what I'm doing." She went quiet for a moment, and I could hear her breathing on the other end, measured and deliberate. When she finally spoke again, her voice had softened, but the worry remained. "Your grandfather used to say that patience is a weapon when wielded by the right hands. I pray you know what you're holding, baby girl. I do, Grandma. I promise I do." My best friend Jasmine showed up at my apartment the next morning with coffee, beignets from that Creole place we loved, and fire in her eyes. Jasmine and I had been friends since Howard University, both of us young and ambitious, both of us determined to build something meaningful. She'd gone into real estate, climbed her way to senior broker, and never took disrespect from anyone. She'd warned me about Khalil years ago, subtle warnings I'd ignored because love made me blind. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Tell me you didn't actually agree to give him everything." "Tell me Patricia misunderstood. I gave him everything he asked for." Jasmine set her coffee down hard enough to splash. "Have you lost your entire mind? That restaurant your family built, the house you renovated with your own money, the investments you made while he was out there doing God knows what? You're just going to let him walk away with all of it?" "Yes." "Why?" I pulled out a folder from my desk drawer, thick with documents. Bank statements, invoices, credit card bills, phone logs, investigator reports. I slid it across my kitchen island, because he doesn't know what he's really taking. Jasmine opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the first page, then moved faster through the second and third. By the time she reached the sixth page, her hand was covering her mouth and her eyes were glistening with something between rage and vindication. Is this what I think it is? Every bit of it. And he has no idea I know. She closed the folder carefully, like it contained something precious and dangerous at the same time. She looked up at me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she smiled. Girl, you might be the coldest woman I've ever met. And I mean that with the utmost respect. See, everyone thought I was defeated. They thought I'd given up, that I'd walked into those divorce proceedings and just handed over my life without so much as a whimper. My mama called me crying, my cousins sent worried texts, and people at church whispered prayers for my broken spirit. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't see what I'd discovered buried in 3 years of financial records, secret email accounts, and digital breadcrumbs he thought he'd erased. They didn't understand that sometimes the best way to win isn't to fight louder. It's to step back, stay quiet, and let your enemy walk straight into the trap they built with their own lies. So when I walked into that courtroom for the final hearing, where truth would finally speak louder than lies, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't defeated. I wasn't crying into my pillow wondering how my life had fallen apart. I was patient, deliberate, and absolutely certain of what was about to unfold. Khalil sat at his table looking like he'd already spent the settlement money in his mind. He'd been showing up to Sunday service at a different church, one where nobody knew our history. Sitting in the back row with his new girlfriend on his arm, some young woman named Chanel who worked as a pharmaceutical sales rep and didn't know she was dating a liar and a thief. He'd already made plans to renovate the restaurant, rebrand it under his name, and cut out every piece of my family's legacy. He'd already counted money he thought was his. He glanced at me when I walked in, and I saw it. That cold, victorious look, like he'd won some prize he'd been chasing for years. I signed every document they placed in front of me. I agreed to every term Patricia had negotiated under my instruction. My family sat in the back row looking like they were attending a funeral. My mama dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. My Uncle Frederick sat stone-faced, arms crossed, radiating silent fury. And then the courtroom doors opened. 2 women in dark suits walked in, federal agents with credentials clipped to their belts. They approached Jerome, Khalil's lawyer, and handed him a document. I watched the color drain from his face. I watched him lean over and whisper something into Khalil's ear, 4 words that I couldn't hear but could read in the way Khalil's entire body went rigid. His smug expression vanished. His hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned pale. And then he did something I'll never forget. He turned and looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the exact moment he understood. He screamed my name. Not a yell, a full-throated scream that echoed through the courtroom like a wounded animal. The bailiff rushed over. The judge banged her gavel 3 times, but I just sat there, hands folded in my lap, and watched the man who stole my trust, my money, and my peace finally receive exactly what he'd earned. My name is Brielle Carter, and this is the story of how I lost everything and took it all back. Let me take you back to the beginning, to where everything started to make sense, even though it felt like the world was ending. I grew up in Southwest Atlanta, in a neighborhood where everyone knew your name and your grandmother's name, and what kind of greens you brought to the church potluck. My grandfather, Robert Carter, started Carter's Kitchen in 1989 with a single food truck parked outside Georgia Tech's campus. He wasn't a trained chef. He was a man who loved feeding people, who believed that good food and good conversation could build community. He served soul food with a twist. His jerk chicken mac and cheese became legendary. His peach cobbler pound cake sold out every single day, and his sweet tea was so perfect, people swore he'd made a deal with the devil to get the recipe right. By the time I was 10 years old, that food truck had turned into a small restaurant in Cascade Heights. By the time I was 16, Carter's Kitchen was the place where families celebrated graduations, where couples had first dates, where the neighborhood gathered after funerals to remember and to heal. My grandfather died of a stroke when I was 25, right after I'd graduated from Howard with a degree in business management. He left the restaurant to my mother, but Mama had her hands full teaching at Booker T. Washington High School, so she asked me to take over operations. I want you to carry this forward, Brielle. Your granddaddy built this for family. Don't let it become just another business. Keep it alive. I promised her I would. I worked 70-hour weeks, learned every position from dishwasher to line cook, rebuilt the menu to honor Granddaddy's recipes while adding my own vision. I expanded catering services, started a Sunday brunch that had lines around the block, and grew Carter's Kitchen into something my family could be proud of. I met Khalil 3 years after I took over the restaurant. He came in one Tuesday afternoon dressed in business casual, carrying a leather portfolio, charm dripping from every word. He was working in pharmaceutical sales, making decent money, talking about investments and future plans and building generational wealth. He had the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We dated for a year. He proposed at Stone Mountain Park during a 4th of July fireworks show, got down on one knee in front of hundreds of strangers, and I said yes because I believed he was my partner, my future, the person I'd build a life with. We got married at Ebenezer Baptist Church, the same place my grandparents had married 40 years earlier. It was a September afternoon, warm and golden, the kind of day that felt blessed from the moment you woke up. Grandma Portia cried through the entire ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief she'd embroidered herself, the same one she'd carried at her own wedding. Jasmine stood beside me as maid of honor, stunning in emerald green, giving a toast that made everyone laugh about our Howard days and cry about friendship that transcends time. Khalil looked at me during our first dance like I was the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered. The DJ played Anita Baker's Sweet Love, and we swayed together while our families watched, while camera flashes captured what I thought would be the beginning of forever. His hands were gentle on my waist. His voice was soft against my ear. I'm going to make you so happy, Brielle. I promise you that. I believed him. God help me. I believed every word. Our honeymoon was 2 weeks in Negril, Jamaica. We stayed at a small resort on 7 Mile Beach, spent our days in the ocean and our nights talking about the future we'd build together. Khalil talked about expanding his career, moving up in pharmaceutical sales, maybe starting his own consulting firm one day. I talked about growing Carter's Kitchen, adding new locations, creating jobs in the community, making my grandfather proud. We're going to build an empire together, he said, his hand in mine as we watched the sunset paint the Caribbean sky in shades of orange and purple. Our kids are going to grow up knowing that their parents created something meaningful. I held on to that vision for years. I held on to it even when reality started to look different than the dream. Our daughter, Ayana, came 2 years later, born on a rainy Tuesday morning in March. 8 pounds, 6 ounces, with a full head of curly hair and my grandmother's knowing eyes. The moment they placed her in my arms, I understood what my mama meant when she said that becoming a mother changes every single thing you thought you knew about love. Khalil was in the delivery room, holding my hand through every contraction, tears streaming down his face when he first heard her cry. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Brielle, we made something perfect." Those early months with Ayana were exhausting in the most beautiful way. I'd bring her to the restaurant in a carrier strapped to my chest, cooking one-handed, taking breaks to nurse her in the office, introducing her to the staff who became her extended family. My head chef, a woman named Keisha, who'd worked with my grandfather since the beginning, would sing old gospel hymns while she prepped vegetables, and Ayana would fall asleep to the sound of her voice, mixed with the rhythm of the kitchen. Khalil was attentive during that first year. He'd come home from work and take Ayana so I could shower or sleep or just breathe for 20 minutes without someone needing me. He'd walk her around the house at 2 in the morning when she wouldn't settle, singing old R&B songs in a voice he'd never let anyone else hear. He'd look at me across the dinner table with such tenderness that I'd forget about the exhaustion, forget about the breast milk stains and the sleepless nights, and the way my body didn't quite feel like my own anymore. Then Zaire came 3 years later, and everything shifted again. He was born during a summer thunderstorm, arrived so fast we barely made it to the hospital. 7 pounds, 11 ounces, with his father's dimples and a personality that announced itself from day one. Where Ayana had been calm and observant, Zaire was wild energy and endless questions. He wanted to touch everything, taste everything, understand how everything worked. I used to bring both kids to the restaurant on weekends, Ayana helping fold napkins with the precision of someone 3 times her age, Zaire helping in the kitchen by stealing tastes of whatever was cooking and giving his very serious opinions about which desserts were his favorites. The staff adored them both. Our regular customers watched them grow up, brought them birthday presents, asked about their school projects and soccer games. Those were sweet years, exhausting but full of purpose and meaning. I was building something that would outlast me, something my children could inherit if they chose to, something that honored my grandfather's memory and my family's sacrifices. I worked 70-hour weeks, but I loved every minute of it. I was creating legacy, building community, feeding people not just food, but love and connection. Khalil seemed proud of me during those years. He'd bring colleagues to the restaurant for lunch, show off the success I'd built, introduce me as my brilliant wife who runs this place. He'd tell stories about my grandfather, about family legacy, about building generational wealth. He'd put his arm around me and smile like we were a team. But looking back now, with eyes that have been opened by betrayal, I can see the moments I missed. The slight edge of resentment when someone praised my success. The way he'd change the subject when conversations turned to my business accomplishments. The subtle comparisons he'd make between his corporate world and my little restaurant. The increasing absences, the late nights, the business trips that seemed to multiply every quarter. I told myself it was stress from his job, that pharmaceutical sales was demanding and competitive. I told myself that men processed things differently, that giving him space was supporting him. I told myself that our love was strong enough to weather the distance that was slowly opening between us like a crack in foundation. Small at first, but growing wider every day. But somewhere around year 9 of our marriage, Khalil started to change. It wasn't sudden, wasn't dramatic enough to trigger immediate alarm. It was gradual, like watching someone you love slowly become a stranger, so subtle that you question whether you're imagining things or whether something real is shifting beneath the surface. He stopped coming to the restaurant as often. At first, it was once a week instead of 3 times. Then it became once a month. Then he'd make excuses. Too much work, too tired. Had a big presentation the next day. He used to love sitting at the bar during dinner service, watching me work, tasting new menu items I'd developed, giving me that proud smile that made all the exhaustion worthwhile. But somewhere along the way, that stopped. And I was too busy, too focused on keeping everything running to recognize what was really happening. He started working later and later. 10 p.m. became midnight, became 2 in the morning. When I'd ask about it, he'd get defensive. You don't understand what it's like in corporate America, Brielle. You run a small business. It's different when you're climbing a ladder in a major pharmaceutical company. There are politics, expectations, quotas I have to meet. The words stung not because they were harsh, but because of what they implied, that what I did was somehow less important, less demanding, less worthy of respect. as if feeding hundreds of people every week, managing a staff of 15, honoring my grandfather's legacy, maintaining the financial health of a business that had been running for 30 years was something small and inconsequential. I should have pushed back. I should have demanded he explain exactly what made his work more valuable than mine. But I was raised to support my husband, to believe that a strong woman lifts her man up even when he's tearing her down. So I swallowed my hurt, made his favorite meals even though he'd arrive home too late to eat them, and told myself this was temporary, just a season we had to weather. His relationship with his phone changed too, and that was perhaps the clearest sign I should have recognized. It became an extension of his body, constantly in his hand, screen always facing down, password changed every few weeks. He'd take it with him to the bathroom, to the bedroom, to the backyard when he wanted privacy for a work call. If I walked into a room while he was texting, he'd quickly switch screens, his face arranging itself into casual innocence that looked like anything but. When I asked about it once, trying to keep my voice light and curious rather than accusatory, he exploded. "Why are you keeping tabs on me? Why can't I have some privacy? Do I interrogate you about every conversation you have at the restaurant?" I was so shocked by his anger that I apologized. Apologized for noticing that my husband was hiding something. Apologized for having the audacity to wonder why the person I shared a life with needed so many secrets. Then came the physical distance. He started staying on his side of the bed, a careful 6 inches of space between us like an invisible wall. The goodnight kisses disappeared. The casual touches, his hand on my lower back as I cooked, his lips on my forehead before leaving for work, the way he used to pull me close while we watched TV, all of it evaporated like morning dew under harsh sunlight. Our intimacy became mechanical when it happened at all, which was less and less frequently. Once a month became something that required planning and felt more like obligation than desire. He'd close his eyes, and I couldn't shake the feeling he was imagining someone else. Sometimes he'd say a name that wasn't mine in his sleep, then wake up startled and defensive when I asked about it. It was a colleague, he'd say. We were working on a pitch together. It doesn't mean anything, but it meant everything. Every small lie, every deflection, every moment of distance was a brick in a wall that was slowly separating us. And I was so busy trying to hold our family together, trying to keep the restaurant thriving, trying to be the perfect wife and mother and businesswoman that everyone expected me to be, that I didn't see the wall until I was completely on the other side of it. The changes in his appearance were subtle, but significant. New cologne, expensive and sophisticated, nothing like the casual scent he'd worn for years. Better clothes, tailored shirts, and designer jeans instead of his usual comfortable style. He started going to a barber in Buckhead, paying $50 for a haircut when he used to go to Mr. Raymond's shop in the neighborhood for $15. He joined a gym and became obsessed with working out, leaving at 5 in the morning and returning 2 hours later, showered and energized in a way he never was after coming home from work. When I complimented the changes, trying to find something positive to say, something that might bridge the growing distance between us, he barely acknowledged it. Just trying to take better care of myself. Is that a problem? Everything was framed as me being the problem. Me being too sensitive. Me being too suspicious. Me being too demanding. Me not understanding his world, his pressures, his needs. The gaslighting was so subtle, so consistent that I started to question my own perceptions. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe marriage just evolved this way after a decade. Maybe I was expecting too much. But Jasmine saw what I was trying not to see. The first real crack that I couldn't ignore, couldn't rationalize away, happened on our 11th anniversary. I'd been planning it for weeks, trying to recreate some of the magic we'd lost, some of the connection that had been eroding steadily over the past 2 years. I'd arranged everything perfectly, called my mama to watch Ayana and Zaire overnight, made reservations at Canoe, that beautiful restaurant on the Chattahoochee River where we'd celebrated our first anniversary a decade earlier. I remembered sitting across from him that night, young and hopeful, believing we could conquer anything together. I bought a new dress for the occasion, a deep burgundy wrap dress that Jasmine had helped me pick out at Phipps Plaza. I'd gotten my hair done at a salon in Cascade, spent 2 hours getting my locks styled, and my makeup perfect. I felt beautiful for the first time in months. Felt like myself instead of just someone's mother and someone's business owner and someone's wife. I felt like Brielle again. I arrived at Canoe at 7 p.m., exactly on time, clutching the anniversary card I'd written that morning. I'd poured my heart into those words, trying to express hope and commitment and the belief that we could find our way back to each other if we just tried. The hostess led me to a table by the window, the river reflecting the amber glow of sunset, the sound of moving water creating a peaceful backdrop. It was perfect. Everything was perfect, except Khalil didn't show up. I sat there, checking my phone every 30 seconds, watching other couples arrive and settle into their evenings. I watched them hold hands across tables, saw them laugh at private jokes, noticed the way they leaned toward each other with the easy intimacy of people who still chose each other every day. A waiter came by 3 times to ask if I was ready to order, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to sympathetic concern. "I'm just waiting for my husband," I said each time, my voice bright and confident even as something inside me was crumbling. "He's running a little late." 45 minutes passed. The sun set completely, and the river turned dark beneath strings of lights that made everything look romantic and magical. I ordered a glass of Pinot Noir just to have something to do with my hands, just to avoid the pitying looks from the couple at the next table, who'd clearly figured out what was happening. My phone finally rang at 7:53. I grabbed it so fast I nearly knocked over my wine glass. Khalil's name lit up the screen and relief flooded through me. He was just late. Traffic, probably. Something came up. He'd be here soon, apologetic and sweet, and we could salvage this evening. "Bree?" I completely forgot. His voice had no apology in it, just irritation, like I was inconveniencing him by reminding him of our anniversary. "I'm at a work dinner with regional managers. It's important. Can we reschedule?" The noise of the restaurant faded. I could hear his colleagues in the background, laughter and clinking glasses, and the buzz of people having a good time. He wasn't working late. He was at a party. He was having fun while I sat alone on our anniversary, dressed up with nowhere to go, holding a card that suddenly felt like a joke. "Khalil." My voice came out smaller than I intended. "It's our anniversary. I know, I'm sorry. But this dinner has been scheduled for weeks. You know how important my career is. We can do something this weekend, okay?" Silence stretched between us, filled with everything I wanted to say and couldn't. I wanted to scream that our marriage should be more important than any business dinner. I wanted to tell him that I'd spent weeks planning this, that I'd left our children with my mother, that I'd spent money we didn't really have on this dress because I was trying to save us. I wanted to ask when I had become so low on his list of priorities that he couldn't even remember the day we'd promised forever to each other. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I just said, "Okay," and hung up. I sat at that table for another 10 minutes, finishing my wine, trying to compose myself enough to walk out without crying. The waiter approached one more time, his young face full of genuine concern. "Ma'am, I don't mean to overstep, but if you need anything..." I paid for the wine I'd ordered, tipped him more than I should have given the circumstances, and walked out to the parking lot on shaky legs. The night was warm and humid, typical Atlanta summer, but I felt cold all over. I sat in my car in that parking lot and cried until my mascara ran and my eyes swelled and I couldn't catch my breath. I cried for the marriage I thought I had. I cried for the man who used to love me enough to never forget our anniversary. I cried for the woman I'd become, someone who accepted being forgotten, who apologized for having expectations, who made herself smaller and smaller, trying to fit into a space that was never meant for her anymore. That was the moment I started to understand that something was deeply, irreversibly wrong. That was the moment the foundation cracked wide enough that I couldn't pretend I didn't see it anymore. Jasmine cornered me at the restaurant 3 weeks after the anniversary disaster. It was a Tuesday night. We just closed up after a busy dinner service, and I was in the back office going over food costs and payroll, trying to lose myself in numbers because numbers made sense in a way my life didn't anymore. She walked in without knocking, closed the door behind her, and sat down across from my cluttered desk with an expression I'd learned to recognize over 20 years of friendship. She had something important to say, and she wasn't leaving until she said it. "We need to talk. I'm kind of busy, Jazz. End-of-month reconciliation and Brielle." She said my name the way she used to when we were in college, and I was about to make a bad decision. Put the calculator down. Look at me. I looked up, and the concern in her eyes made my throat tight. "I saw Khalil last week. My hands stopped moving, okay? He wasn't alone." The office suddenly felt too small, too warm, the air thick enough to choke on. I set my pen down carefully, like if I moved too quickly, everything would shatter. "What do you mean he wasn't alone?" Jasmine leaned forward, her elbows on her knees, her voice gentle but firm. "I mean, I saw him at Ocean Prime last Thursday night. I was there with a client doing a celebration dinner for closing on a property, and I saw your husband at a corner table with a woman. They weren't just having a business dinner, Brielle. They were close, really close." She was laughing at everything he said, touching his arm, leaning in. And he was looking at her the way he used to look at you. My chest tightened. Maybe it was a colleague. You know how he is with work dinners. Jasmine shook her head slowly. "Girl, you know me. You know I wouldn't bring this to you unless I was sure. This wasn't a work dinner. This was a date." She was wearing a red dress cut down to here. Jasmine gestured toward her chest, and he had his hand on her knee under the table. I could see it when I walked past to the restroom, and when I made eye contact with him, you know what he did. "What?" He looked right through me, like he didn't know me, like we hadn't been at your wedding, like I hadn't held your babies when they were born. He pretended not to see me, Brielle, because he knew exactly what I was witnessing. I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend him, to find some rational explanation that would make this okay, but I couldn't. Because deep down, beneath all my denial and hope and determination to keep my family intact, I'd known. Maybe not the specifics, maybe not her name or what she looked like, but I'd known something was wrong. I'd felt it in every late night, every defensive response, every time he'd pulled away from my touch like I was contagious. Did you see who she was? Young, early 20s maybe. Light-skinned, long weave, expensive jewelry. She had that look, like she thought she'd won something. The description felt like a physical blow. I'd been working 70-hour weeks, raising our children, taking care of my grandmother, managing the restaurant, trying to be everything to everyone, and he'd been out in public. Not even hiding it properly with someone younger and prettier and less complicated than the life we'd built together. Jasmine reached across the desk and took my hand. "Brie, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to be the one to tell you this, but you're my sister and I couldn't let you keep going through life not knowing what's really happening." "I appreciated your honesty," I managed to say, even though my voice sounded strange and distant to my own ears. What am I supposed to do with this? You're supposed to stop making excuses for him. You're supposed to stop shrinking yourself trying to fit into his life. You're supposed to remember who you were before him, a brilliant, beautiful, strong woman who doesn't need a man who can't appreciate what he has. "I love him," I whispered, and the admission felt pathetic even as I said it. "I know you do." But love isn't supposed to make you feel like this. Love isn't supposed to leave you sitting alone on your anniversary. Love isn't supposed to make you question your worth or doubt your instincts or apologize for having expectations. She was right. I knew she was right. But knowing and accepting are different things, separated by a canyon of hope and denial and fear of what comes next. I need proof, I finally said. Before I do anything drastic, I need to know for sure. No assumptions, no maybes. I need evidence. Jasmine nodded slowly. Then let's get you evidence. Whatever you need, I'm here. But promise me something. What? Promise me you won't let him make you feel crazy. Promise me you'll trust your instincts. And promise me that when you find out the truth, not if, when, you'll remember your own strength. You're not the one who should be ashamed here. I promised, even though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. Even though shame and betrayal were already settling into my bones like winter cold, making me question every choice I'd made, every warning sign I'd ignored, every moment I'd chosen to believe a lie because the truth was too painful to face. I didn't want to believe it. I made excuses. I rationalized. I told myself Jasmine was mistaken, that Khalil would never betray me like that our vows meant something. But doubt is like a seed. Once planted, it grows in the dark, roots spreading until it takes over everything. I started paying attention differently. I noticed the late nights that smelled like perfume instead of hospital antiseptic. I noticed the sudden interest in grooming, new clothes, expensive cologne. I noticed how his phone was always face down, always locked, always out of reach. I noticed the way he'd step out of the room to take certain calls, the way his voice would drop to a whisper. I wanted to be wrong. God, I wanted to be wrong so badly. But when you've spent 14 years with someone, you know their rhythms, their patterns, their lies. I hired a private investigator 2 days after my conversation with Jasmine. His name was Omar Richardson, a retired Atlanta police detective who'd spent 20 years working financial crimes before opening his own investigation firm specializing in infidelity and fraud cases. I found him through a referral from Patricia Morrison, who I hadn't met yet, but whose name kept coming up when I researched divorce attorneys. His office was in a nondescript building in Midtown, the kind of place you could walk past 100 times and never notice. The waiting room was simple: gray carpet, generic artwork, a water cooler in the corner. Nothing about it suggested the life-changing discoveries that happened behind those doors. Omar was in his mid-50s, tall and solid, with silver threading through his closely cropped hair and eyes that had seen too much human ugliness to be easily shocked. He wore a simple navy suit and moved with the careful deliberation of someone who'd learned not to waste energy on unnecessary motion. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm but gentle, and I could see something like sympathy in his expression. "Mrs. Carter, I appreciate you coming in. Please, have a seat." I sat in the leather chair across from his desk, my hands twisted together in my lap, trying to appear composed even though I felt like I was unraveling from the inside out. "Before we begin, I need to be honest with you about what this process entails." Omar's voice was measured, professional, but not unkind. In my experience, when someone hires me, they already know the truth deep down. They're not looking for answers. They're looking for confirmation. Are you prepared for what that confirmation might look like? Are you prepared for it to be worse than you imagined? I need to know. I need evidence, not suspicions. He nodded slowly, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and uncapped a pen. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning." I spent 90 minutes laying out the past 2 years in detail. The late nights and the new cologne, the defensive responses and the guarded phone, the missed anniversary and Jasmine's sighting at Ocean Prime. I told him about the emotional distance, the way Khalil had become a stranger living in my house, the gut feeling that had been screaming at me for months that something fundamental had shifted in my marriage. Omar took notes, asked clarifying questions, and never once made me feel foolish or paranoid. When I finished, he set his pen down and looked at me directly. "Mrs. Carter, based on what you've told me, I'd say your instincts are correct. The pattern you're describing is textbook infidelity, but you want more than pattern recognition. You want proof. I can get you that proof. The question is, what are you planning to do with it once you have it? I'm not sure yet, but I can't move forward without knowing the truth." "Fair enough. Here's what I'm going to do." I'll conduct surveillance, track his movements, document his activities. I'll pull financial records if you can provide account access. I'll look into phone records, email, social media, credit card statements. Whatever leaves a trail, I'll find it. This usually takes 2 to 3 weeks depending on the subject's patterns. Can you maintain normal behavior at home during that time? Can you interact with him without letting on that you're investigating? I've been pretending everything is fine for 2 years. I can do it for 3 more weeks. Omar's expression softened slightly. That's the hardest part for most people, acting normal when everything inside them is screaming. If you need support during this process, I can recommend therapists who specialize in this particular kind of trauma. I'll be fine. I just need answers. He handed me a contract outlining his rates, his methods, and confidentiality agreements. I signed without hesitation, wrote a check for his retainer from my personal account, and left his office feeling strangely lighter. At least I was doing something. At least I wasn't just passively accepting betrayal anymore. The next 3 weeks were among the longest of my life. I had to wake up next to Khalil every morning, make him coffee, ask him about his day, pretend I didn't know what I knew, what I suspected, what was about to be confirmed. I had to smile when he came home, listen to his work stories that were probably lies, maintain the fiction of normalcy for our children who were too young to understand that their family was fracturing. Ayana noticed something was wrong. She was 9 years old by then, perceptive and sensitive, always watching with those knowing eyes she'd inherited from my grandmother. "Mama, are you and Daddy okay?" she asked one evening while I was helping her with homework. "Of course, sweetness." "Why do you ask? You seem sad, and Daddy's never home anymore." I pulled her close, breathing in the coconut oil I used on her hair, trying to hold on to something pure and innocent in a world that felt increasingly dark and complicated. Adults go through seasons, baby. Sometimes things are easy, and sometimes we have to work harder. But you don't need to worry about it. That's for grown-ups to figure out. She nodded but didn't look convinced. Children know when their parents are lying, even when the lies are meant to protect them. Omar called me exactly 19 days after our initial meeting. It was a Thursday afternoon. I was at the restaurant reviewing vendor invoices, and seeing his name on my phone made my stomach drop. "Mrs. Carter, I have the report ready. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? How bad is it?" There was a pause, and in that pause, I heard everything I needed to know. I think it's best we discuss this in person. I arrived at his office at 9 a.m. the next morning, having told my staff I had a dental appointment. My hands were shaking as I walked through the waiting room. Omar met me at the door, led me into the same conference room where we'd first met, and this time the desk was covered with manila folders, each one labeled and organized with methodical precision. "Mrs. Carter, I'm going to be direct with you because I believe you deserve the truth without decoration. Your husband has been having an affair for approximately 2 years. The words hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting them. 2 years. Not a mistake, not a moment of weakness, not a one-time indiscretion. 2 years of calculated deception. 2 years of coming home to me and our children while living another life entirely. Omar slid photographs across the table. Khalil and a woman entering a hotel in Buckhead. The timestamp showing 3:15 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon when he'd told me he was at a sales meeting. Khalil and the same woman at a restaurant I'd never been to, sitting so close their shoulders touched, her hand on his thigh beneath the table. Khalil and her shopping together at Lenox Square, holding hands like teenagers, looking at jewelry in a way he'd never looked at jewelry with me. Khalil and her kissing in a parking garage, his hands in her hair, her body pressed against his with the familiarity of people who'd done this 1,000 times before. Each photograph was a knife wound, precise and brutal. I forced myself to look at everyone, to absorb the reality of what my marriage had become while I'd been working and raising children and believing in vows that apparently meant nothing. Her name is Chanel Dixon. She's 28 years old, graduated from Spelman 5 years ago, works in pharmaceutical sales at the same company as your husband. They met at a regional conference in Nashville 2 years ago. According to the patterns I've documented, they see each other approximately 3 times per week. Sometimes it's lunch meetings that extend for 3 hours. Sometimes it's evening hotel stays when he's told you he's working late. They've taken 3 trips together in the past year. Omar opened another folder, this one containing printed itineraries, hotel receipts, plane tickets. Miami in February for what he told you was a sales conference. New Orleans in May when he said he was visiting a potential client. Savannah in September during your daughter's birthday weekend when he claimed he had an emergency meeting that couldn't be rescheduled. I remembered that weekend. Ayana had cried when Khalil wasn't there for her birthday party, and I'd made excuses, told her daddy was working hard for our family, promised to make it up to her. The whole time, he'd been on a romantic getaway with his mistress, probably posting photos that didn't include either of us, creating memories in a life where we didn't exist. Omar kept talking, his voice steady and professional, but I could hear the undercurrent of anger beneath the facts. Men like him, former law enforcement who'd chosen to help people uncover the truth. They'd seen the story play out countless times, and it never stopped bothering them. They have a regular hotel they use in Midtown, the Intercontinental, usually a room on the executive floor. He pays cash to avoid paper trails, but I was able to confirm through other means. They have dinner reservations at upscale restaurants, always in Buckhead or Midtown where your social circles are less likely to overlap. She calls him her boyfriend. She has no idea he's married with children. That detail struck me harder than the rest. She didn't even know. She thought she was in a legitimate relationship with a single man who worked hard and treated her well. She was as much a victim of his lies as I was, just a different kind. But Omar wasn't finished. He pulled out another folder, this one thicker than the others, filled with bank statements and spreadsheets and financial documents, highlighted in yellow and marked with sticky notes. Mrs. Carter, during my investigation, I discovered something else, something that goes beyond the affair. Your husband has been embezzling money from Carter's kitchen for approximately 18 months. The room tilted. What? He's been using his access to the business accounts. Access you granted him when you added him as an authorized signatory 3 years ago, to funnel money into offshore accounts. It started small, a few thousand here and there, buried in legitimate business expenses, but it's escalated significantly. In the past 6 months alone, he's transferred over $215,000. I couldn't breathe. My hands were gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles ached. The restaurant, my grandfather's legacy, the business I'd worked myself to exhaustion to protect and grow. Khalil had been stealing from it, bleeding it dry while I'd been too focused on other things to notice the slow financial hemorrhaging. Omar spread out bank statements, highlighted transfers, traced the money trail with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent 2 decades following financial crimes. He showed me shell companies registered in Khalil's name, offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, a complex web of financial deception that had been operating right under my nose. There's more, and this is where it gets legally dangerous for you. I looked up, and his expression was grim. He's been using your business credit to fund the affair. Hotel rooms, jewelry, trips, expensive dinners. He's been charging everything to accounts that are in your name. The corporate American Express that Carter's Kitchen pays off every month, he's run up $47,000 in charges that have nothing to do with business operations. If this comes to light during a divorce, Mrs. Carter, you could be held financially responsible. The IRS could view this as personal use of business funds, which means tax fraud. You could be implicated even though you had no knowledge of his activities. The walls were closing in. It wasn't just betrayal. It wasn't just a broken marriage and a shattered family. This was financial destruction, legal jeopardy, potential criminal charges. Khalil hadn't just stopped loving me. He'd actively worked to destroy me, to take everything my grandfather built, everything I'd sacrificed for, and burn it down to fund his affair and his new life. Can you prove that I didn't know? Can you prove I wasn't involved? That's why I documented everything so thoroughly. Timestamps show you were at the restaurant during many of these transactions. You have witnesses who can testify to your work schedule and routine. Your own financial records show you've been living modestly, not benefiting from this stolen money. Yes, I can prove you weren't involved, but you need to act carefully from this point forward. Omar closed the folders and looked at me with something approaching respect. Mrs. Carter, I've been doing this work for a long time. I've seen people break under less than what you're facing right now, but I can tell you're not the breaking kind. So here's my professional advice. Get a lawyer. Get a good one. Document everything. And whatever you do, don't let him know what you know. Not yet. The element of surprise is the only advantage you have. I left his office with copies of everything, the photographs, the financial records, the evidence of 2 years of systematic deception and theft. I sat in my car in that parking garage and let myself fall apart for exactly 10 minutes. I cried for the marriage I thought I had. I cried for the man I thought I'd married. I cried for my children who were going to have to navigate the aftermath of their father's choices. I cried for my grandmother's legacy that had been violated. I cried for the version of myself who'd been naive enough to believe that love and loyalty were enough to hold a marriage together. I called Patricia Morrison the next morning. She came highly recommended by Jasmine, who'd used her during her own messy divorce 3 years earlier. Patricia was a black woman in her mid-50s, sharp as a blade, with a reputation for destroying unfaithful husbands in court. "Tell me everything," she said when we met at her office. I spent 2 hours laying it all out. The affair, the embezzlement, the financial manipulation, everything Omar had discovered. Patricia took notes, asked pointed questions, and by the end, she was nodding slowly. "You have enough to destroy him, Brielle. We can take this to court, expose everything, and make sure he leaves with nothing. I can make this man pay for what he's done. I don't want that." Patricia looked up sharply. "Excuse me, I want to give him everything he's asking for. Have you lost your mind? I need you to trust me, Patricia. I need you to let him think he's won, and I need you to help me set a trap he'll never see coming." She studied me for a long moment, then leaned back in her chair. "Tell me your plan." I laid it out step by step. Patricia's eyes widened, then narrowed, then finally she smiled, a cold, calculating smile that told me we were on the same page. "This is risky, Brielle. If it doesn't work, you could lose everything for real. It'll work, because men like Khalil always think they're smarter than everyone else. And that arrogance is exactly what's going to destroy him." The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. I had to pretend everything was normal. I had to cook dinner, help with homework, make small talk with a man I now understood was my enemy. I had to sleep in the same bed as someone who'd been systematically destroying everything I loved. But I did it. I played my role perfectly, because I knew what was at stake. Khalil filed for divorce exactly 2 weeks after our conversation. He didn't even have the decency to tell me face to face. I came home from the restaurant to find papers on the kitchen counter, his handwriting on a Post-it note that said, "My lawyer will be in touch." No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement of 14 years of marriage. Just a legal document demanding the house, the cars, and full ownership of Carter's kitchen. I called Patricia immediately. She'd been expecting it. "Are you ready?" "I've been ready." "Then let's give him exactly what he wants." The divorce proceedings moved quickly. Khalil's lawyer, Jerome, was aggressive and condescending, treating me like I was too emotional and stupid to understand legal strategy. He assumed I'd fight, that I'd cry and rage and make demands. When Patricia presented our counteroffer, complete surrender to all of Khalil's terms, Jerome's expression shifted from confidence to confusion. "You're agreeing to everything?" "Every single item," Patricia said calmly. Jerome leaned over to Khalil and whispered something. Khalil's face was unreadable, but I saw the flicker of suspicion in his eyes. He knew me well enough to know this wasn't like me, but his greed won out. He signed the agreement, his signature bold and confident, like a man who'd just won the lottery. What Khalil didn't know was that every signature, every agreement, every transfer of ownership was building a legal trap. Because the moment Carter's kitchen became his, fully and completely, he also became responsible for every financial crime committed under its name. Every dollar embezzled, every fraudulent transaction, every piece of evidence Omar had collected now belonged to him. Patricia had worked with a forensic accountant named Elijah Green, a brother who specialized in financial crimes. Together, they'd built an airtight case, but they'd kept it sealed, waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came the day of our final hearing. The courtroom was small and sterile, wood paneling and harsh fluorescent lights. My family filled the back rows. Grandma Portia, my mama, Uncle Frederick, Jasmine, cousins I hadn't seen in years. They'd come to support me, to witness what they thought was my defeat. Khalil sat at his table looking victorious, already planning his next moves. He'd brought Chanel to court, seated her 3 rows back like she was his prize. She wore a tight red dress and too much perfume, smiling at him like she'd won some competition. I signed every document. I agreed to every term. I watched my family's faces crumble with each signature. And then the doors opened. Federal agents Andrea Willis and Marcus Chen walked in with purpose, their credentials visible, their expressions professionally neutral. They approached Jerome and handed him a document. I watched Jerome's face change from confidence to confusion to absolute horror in the span of 5 seconds. He leaned over to Khalil and whispered something. Khalil's entire body went rigid. His hands gripped the table. His face turned ashen. The lead agent, Andrea Willis, a black woman with silver-streaked locks and a voice like steel, spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Khalil James Carter, you are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Khalil exploded. He screamed my name, lunged toward me across the courtroom. The bailiff caught him before he made it 3 steps. He was still screaming when they put him in handcuffs. You set me up! You knew, you planned this whole thing. Judge Morrison banged her gavel, her voice sharp and commanding. Order! I will have order in this courtroom. But Khalil wouldn't stop. His face was contorted with rage and disbelief, his voice raw and desperate. You gave me the business because you knew it was poisoned. You let me take it so I'd take the blame. You knew everything. I stood slowly, smoothed my dress, looked him straight in the eyes, and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. I knew exactly what you did, Khalil. Every stolen dollar, every lie, every betrayal. I gave you the business because you wanted it so badly, because your greed made you blind. You thought you were taking my future, but all you took was your own. The bailiff dragged him toward the exit. Chanel was crying in the back row, her red dress suddenly looking cheap and ridiculous. Khalil kept screaming until the courtroom doors closed behind him, his voice echoing down the hallway like a ghost. The room was silent. My family sat frozen, trying to process what had just happened. Patricia sat beside me, professional composure intact, but I could see the slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Judge Morrison looked at me over her reading glasses. Mrs. Carter, I assume you have documentation to support the prosecution's case? Everything they need, Your Honor. Financial records, email correspondence, witness statements. It's all been submitted to the district attorney's office. She nodded slowly. This court is adjourned. Mrs. Carter, you're free to go. I walked out of that courtroom into brilliant Atlanta sunshine, the kind that makes everything look new and possible. My family surrounded me. Everyone talking at once, asking questions, demanding explanations. But Grandma Portia just pulled me into her arms and held me tight. Your grandfather would be so proud, baby girl, so proud. I'm not done yet, Grandma. She pulled back and looked at me with those wise, knowing eyes. I know you're not, Brielle, but you've already won the hardest battle. You protected what matters. Everything else is just details. The legal proceedings took 6 months to fully resolve, 6 months of depositions and hearings and evidence presentations that felt both endless and surreal. Khalil was charged with 14 counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Each count carried its own weight, its own story of deception meticulously documented by forensic accountants who'd spent weeks untangling the web he'd woven. The evidence was overwhelming. His signatures on fraudulent documents clear as day, his email communications setting up shell companies with names that sounded legitimate but existed only to hide stolen money, bank transfers he'd authorized personally, each one traceable back to him, his fingerprints, literal and figurative, all over every crime. I attended every hearing. I watched him sit at the defendant's table, watched the confidence drain from his face as prosecutor after prosecutor laid out his crimes in excruciating detail. I watched him realize that his charm and his excuses and his attempts to shift blame weren't going to save him. I watched him understand, perhaps for the first time in his life, that actions have consequences. His lawyer tried every defense. Khalil claimed he was manipulated by an unknown party at the restaurant, that someone else must have had access to the accounts. When that fell apart under scrutiny, he claimed he didn't understand what he was signing, that he'd been overwhelmed and confused by financial jargon. When forensic experts testified that the transactions showed sophisticated knowledge and deliberate intent, he finally claimed he'd been coerced by Chanel, that she'd threatened him, that she'd used their relationship to force him into criminal activity. It was pathetic watching him throw his mistress under the bus, watching him blame everyone except himself. But nothing worked. The forensic evidence was too strong, too detailed, too damning. His own emails betrayed him. Messages where he bragged about moving money where it needed to be, where he celebrated successful transfers, where he planned his future with Chanel using funds he'd stolen from the business my grandfather built. In the end, he took a plea deal rather than risk a jury trial that everyone knew he'd lose. 4 years in federal prison, full restitution of stolen funds totaling over $400,000 when all the hidden accounts were discovered and liquidated, permanent forfeiture of any claim to Carter's Kitchen or any Carter family assets, a criminal record that would follow him for the rest of his life, making it nearly impossible to work in corporate America again, to rebuild the image he'd cultivated so carefully. Chanel left him 3 weeks after his arrest. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that she'd moved back home to Augusta, that she'd quit her pharmaceutical job, that she'd been devastated to discover the man she thought loved her had been using her as part of an elaborate scheme while married with children. I felt sorry for her, in a way. She'd been lied to, just as thoroughly as I had, just from a different angle. The stolen money was recovered through asset seizure, a process that took months of legal maneuvering and court orders. The house Khalil had demanded in the divorce, foreclosed when he couldn't make payments from his jail cell, sold at auction for less than we'd paid for it. The cars he'd insisted he needed, repossessed within weeks, sold to cover outstanding debts. The investments he'd made with embezzled funds, thinking he was building wealth in secret. Frozen by federal order, liquidated and redistributed as restitution to Carter's Kitchen's accounts. I won't lie and say there wasn't some satisfaction in watching his carefully constructed world collapse like a house of cards in a strong wind. After everything he'd done, after every betrayal and lie and moment of gaslighting when he'd made me feel crazy for suspecting the truth, a part of me wanted to see him suffer. A part of me wanted him to feel a fraction of the pain he'd caused, but that feeling faded quicker than I expected, dissolved faster than I would have predicted, because revenge, real revenge, isn't about making someone suffer. Revenge is about reclaiming what they took from you, your peace, your power, your sense of self-worth. And once you reclaim those things, once you rebuild yourself into someone stronger and wiser and more resilient, the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant. They become a chapter in your story instead of the whole narrative. They become a lesson instead of a life sentence. I rebuilt Carter's Kitchen from the ground up with intention and purpose I'd never had before. The restaurant had taken a significant financial hit during the divorce proceedings and the embezzlement discovery. Vendors had gotten nervous, wondering if they'd be paid. Some longtime employees had started looking for other jobs, worried about stability. The neighborhood had watched with concern, wondering if this beloved institution would become another casualty of betrayal and broken families. But I was determined not to let that happen. I met with every vendor personally, showed them the financial recovery plan, promised them transparency going forward. I gathered my staff, Keisha, my head chef who'd been with us for 15 years, Danny, our manager, who knew the business almost as well as I did, Maria, our head server, who remembered every regular customer's favorite dish, and I told them the truth, all of it. The affair, the embezzlement, the trap I'd set, the resolution. "I should have told you all sooner," I said, my voice steady even though my heart was racing. "You deserved to know what was happening, but I'm telling you now because we're going to rebuild this place together. Not as my grandfather's restaurant, not as a family legacy that I'm just maintaining, as our restaurant. A place we create together, where everyone has ownership in the success." I implemented profit sharing. I created employee stock options. I brought in financial advisors to teach financial literacy to my entire staff, determined that no one would ever again be vulnerable to the kind of manipulation Khalil had perpetrated. I made Carter's Kitchen not just a restaurant, but a community, a model for what Black-owned businesses could be when they prioritized people over profit, sustainability over shortcuts. Word got out about what had happened, not through gossip but through honest conversation and media coverage of the trial. Local news outlets covered the story, not as scandal but as resilience. Local businesswoman fights back against fraud. Restaurant owner's strategic takedown of embezzling husband. How one woman turned betrayal into business comeback. The response from the community was overwhelming. Regular customers came back in force, bringing friends and family, wanting to support a business that had been victimized. New customers came because they'd heard about a woman who'd refused to be broken, who'd stood up not with violence or vengeance, but with intelligence and strategy. We started getting catering orders from churches and organizations that wanted to support Black women-owned businesses. Food critics from Atlanta Magazine and Creative Loafing came to review us, wrote glowing features about our food and our story. Within 6 months, we were profitable again, more profitable than we'd ever been. Within a year, I'd saved enough to open a second location in College Park, a neighborhood that reminded me of Southwest Atlanta. Working-class families, strong community bonds, people who valued good food and honest businesses. I hired local residents, trained them the same way my grandfather had trained me, taught them that a restaurant is more than just food service, it's community building. My grandfather's legacy wasn't just alive, it was thriving in ways he'd never imagined. And I knew, deep in my bones, that he was looking down at this moment with pride. Not because I'd destroyed my husband, but because I'd protected what he'd built and transformed it into something even stronger. The custody arrangement was straightforward given Khalil's incarceration. The court granted me primary physical custody of Ayanna and Zaire, with the provision that Khalil would be allowed supervised visits once he was released from federal prison. But by the time that day came, I wasn't sure there would be much of a relationship left to salvage. Children are resilient, but they're also perceptive. They understand betrayal even when they don't have adult language for it. Ayanna, who was 11 now, had asked me once if I hated her father for what he did. We were in the kitchen on a Saturday morning making pancakes together like we'd done hundreds of times before. She was mixing batter with methodical precision, focused on the task in a way that reminded me of my grandfather. When the question came out of nowhere, dropped into the comfortable silence like a stone into still water. "Mama, do you hate Daddy?" I stopped flipping the pancake on the griddle and turned to look at her. Her eyes were serious, searching, trying to understand something that even adults struggle to process. I thought about it carefully before I answered, because children deserve honesty even when the truth is complicated. No, sweetheart, I don't hate him. Hate takes up too much space in your heart, leaves room for nothing else good. It's like keeping a poison in your chest and expecting it to hurt someone else. Your father made choices that hurt a lot of people, including himself. But hating him won't change those choices or heal the hurt. The only thing I can control is how I move forward, and I choose to move forward with love for you, for your brother, for this family we're building together. She nodded slowly, processing this in the way that children do, absorbing lessons that might not make full sense until years later when they face their own betrayals and heartbreaks. "Is it okay if I'm angry at him?" she asked quietly. "It's absolutely okay to be angry. Anger is honest. Anger tells you that something wrong happened and that you recognize it. You can be angry and still choose not to let that anger define your whole life. Does that make sense?" "Yeah." She went back to stirring her batter, but I could see her shoulders relax slightly, like I'd given her permission to feel what she was already feeling. Zaire was simpler about everything, the way 6-year-old boys can be when faced with complexity they're not ready to understand. He just wanted to help in the kitchen, wanted to learn my grandfather's recipes, wanted to know that I would be there when I said I would. He didn't ask about his father much. When he did, his questions were practical rather than emotional. "When is Daddy coming back?" "Not for a while, baby. He made some mistakes and now he has to deal with the consequences." "Oh, can I have more juice?" And that was it. In Zaire's world, love was measured in presence rather than words. I'd never missed a single parent-teacher conference. I'd never skipped one of his soccer games, even when the restaurant was slammed and I was exhausted. I'd never broken a promise, no matter how small. And because of that consistency, because of that reliability, he felt secure in a way that my words about his father's absence couldn't shake. I made sure both my children had access to a therapist, a kind Black woman named Dr. Imani Washington, who specialized in helping children process parental betrayal and family trauma. She met with them weekly, gave them space to express feelings they might not share with me, taught them coping mechanisms for anger and confusion and grief. "Children are resilient," Dr. Washington told me during one of our parent consultations. "More resilient than we give them credit for. What matters isn't that they experience this trauma. What matters is how the adults around them respond to it. You're giving them honesty, consistency, and safety. That's the foundation they'll build their whole lives on." I held on to those words during the hard moments, the nights when Ayana cried for a father who'd betrayed our family, the days when Zaire asked questions I didn't have good answers for. I held on to them when I doubted whether I was handling any of this correctly, whether I was doing enough, whether my children would carry scars from their father's choices that no amount of my love could heal. Looking back, I learned something crucial through all of this. Strength isn't about being the loudest voice in the room or fighting every battle with your fists up. It's about knowing when to be quiet, when to observe, when to let your enemies destroy themselves with their own hubris. It's about protecting your peace, your integrity, and the people who depend on you. My husband wanted everything. I gave it to him. Every lie, every consequence, every piece of the trap he'd built with his own greed. He thought he was taking my future, but all he took was his own. And me? I'm still here, still building, still standing. Because some things can't be stolen. Character, integrity, the love of your children, the respect of your community, the legacy of generations before you. Those things have to be earned. And once earned, they can't be taken away by anyone. If you're going through something difficult right now, if someone has betrayed your trust or broken your heart or made you feel like you've lost everything, I want you to hear this. You haven't lost. Not yet. Not unless you choose to. As long as you stay true to who you are. As long as you keep moving forward with honesty and patience and strategic thinking, you will find your way through. The storm doesn't last forever. but the person you become while weathering it stays with you for the rest of your life. My name is Brielle Noel Carter. This is my story, and I'm just getting started. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. And before you go, click on Hype to help this video reach even more people. Your support keeps these voices alive and keeps our community growing. Thank you for listening.